Cyberpunk Edgerunners is that show. That show that leaves you with that feeling when the final episode's credits hit you. You know, that feeling where you're kind of just shell-shocked amongst a mix of adrenaline and melancholy, and all you can think to do is go back and watch it all over again. Yeah, that feeling. I've been catching up on a bunch of shows that I missed in 2022, including a bunch of highly rated anime, and it was after finishing one of those anime that I next put on Cyberpunk Edgerunners. And after the first half of the first episode, I felt so much more of a connection to Edgerunners protagonist, David Martinez, than I did any of the characters from that other show. I won't say which show that was, but you can just guess between these ones and pick whichever makes you angriest. And while, yes, obviously which characters I or you might personally connect with is completely subjective, I thought it would be at least interesting to look deeper at Edgerunner's introduction of David to see if there's anything we can learn about what makes him such a compelling hero and how other writers can introduce their own protagonists. And also so that I get something constructive out of immediately rewatching the show, other than pure, unfiltered copium. So, to put some context around the series, when most people think of Cyberpunk, they think of this. Yeah, Cyberpunk will forever be a name plagued by perhaps gaming's most cursed launch since that time that Atari filled a crater in the desert with unsold ET cartridges. A plague which, despite recent bug patches, it's never really been able to shake. Which makes it all the more impressive that Edgerunners seems to have reawakened a lot of that lost excitement around Mike Pondsmith's futuristic dystopian setting. To the degree that, after the anime's release, Cyberpunk 2077's concurrent players tripled, and Edgerunners itself was crowned Anime of the Year at Crunchyroll's awards show. This collaboration between CD Projekt Red and Studio Trigger seems to connect die-hard, returning, and new fans in their admiration for this setting and its story. A story which, if you're wondering, is entirely separate to both the video game and the tabletop RPGs. Edgerunners really stands on its own feet and can be enjoyed without any prior knowledge, which is how I went into it. So, if you haven't watched it yet, go do so now, as I'm about to dive into and spoil its first 2 episodes. So, Cyberpunk Edgerunners is just 10 episodes long, cramming in a ton of detailed story and even more detailed action, making its pacing even more breakneck than getting involved with whatever this is. And what this means is the show has to be even more efficient in introducing its main characters and getting us to connect with them instantly. However, the first thing that Edgerunners does is set the vibe. Our introduction to the world of Edgerunners is this jacked up cyborg man going absolutely ham on the Night City PD. This isn't David Martinez, this isn't our hero, but this is everything Edgerunners promises to be. Violent, loud, fast, dark, bloody, extreme, and completely unashamed. This is Edgerunners giving you the chance to get out now, before things get really insane. And yeah, while this scene does become plot relevant down the line, right now it's just setting the tone. This is what you can expect in Night City. And that too, but you can't show that on a Christian video platform like YouTube, so let's move on pretty quickly. Our first glimpses of David Martinez follow, showing us that opening scene was an immersive virtual reality experience he was trying to sneak in before the school day. When he goes to grab his uniform from the washing machine, it informs him that until it's topped up with credits, his clothes will remain half washed. This establishes David as a normal, relatable teenager, more interested in chasing a quick thrill than in his studies, as well as introducing the all-consuming consumerism that infests every aspect of Night City, with the Martinez household's money struggles being shouldered by David's single mum Gloria, who has to work herself into the ground just to keep them afloat.
You keep sleeping on the couch like that, gonna get early onset arthritis.
I know, just dead after my night shift is all.
As David makes his way to school, we get a quick tour of Night City, this towering cage of concrete and neon that reaches for the sky while leaving everyone to wallow in the squalor beneath. David breezes through the streets, invisible to the myriad of myopic background characters lost to their own chosen brands of self-pleasure, and painting a particularly depraved picture of the city. And yes, that dude do be jacking it. As David finally makes it to school, we're quickly reminded of his money troubles, and it's these money troubles that lead to the first major turning point for David in the show. By trying to cheap out on upgrading his VR tech for school, David causes the class VR system to break down, highlighting not only again David's financial issues at home, but also him not fitting in at school. Despite his good grades at school, David's never really been accepted by his chummy classmates at Arasaka Academy, all of whom are part of the established corporate social elite, and his recent malfunction with the school's VR system is only going to exacerbate that isolation. It's also going to get Gloria called into the academy, where she offers to pay for any repairs, deepening their financial instability and leading nicely into David's third major concern, not being able to live up to his mum's hopes for him. The brilliance of Edgerunners giving us this glimpse into David's daily life is that in just 10 minutes the show has given us 3 relatable, grounded reasons for us to identify with our main character. Because pretty much everyone has experienced either money issues, not being able to fit in, or failing to reach your parents' expectations, or some combination of the 3 at one stage or another in their lives. David's burdens feel real and connect him to the reality of his surroundings, which we can already see are built on financial inequality and social stratification. This creates a more approachable introduction to a protagonist than, say, a character trying to reclaim their stolen birthright, avenge their clan, and become the strongest demon sorcerer in school, or whatever it is bad anime protags do these days. Edgerunners also does a great job of showing us how these problems don't exist in isolation. Their money issues and low status feed into David being isolated at school, which causes him to care less about his studies and fall short of Gloria's dreams for him. To make up for that, he seeks gratification elsewhere, putting further strain on their funds, all of which is compounded by the rampant inequality of Night City. David might not be able to see it, but the audience quickly get a view for how precarious his position is, and if anything went wrong for him, his whole life could quickly come crashing down. So then, when David and Gloria get caught in the crossfire of a gang shootout, and Gloria ends up in the hospital, we're invested in the situation not simply because something bad happened to the main character's mum, but because we can already see that David is in no position to survive Night City without Gloria there, and we're trying to connect the dots to see what's going to happen to him. Mom! Night City is characteristically unsympathetic to the Martinez's problems. Even before Gloria makes it to the hospital, despite being a medic herself, the emergency responders leave her to bleed out on the roadside, because a cursory scan tells them that she's not covered by their premium medical plan. And when she is treated for her injuries, it's only the most basic assistance from some shady back alley doctor, with David not even being permitted visitation rights. Gloria was the only one bringing in any money, something which David finds out she was supplementing by selling black market body modifications on top of her job as a medic.
Military grade, this thing really? It definitely ain't legal.
So naturally, her being out of action leaves David flat broke. They fall behind on their rent, meaning that David now has an eviction hanging over his head, as well as a mum in the hospital, and school bully Katsuo takes the opportunity to insult Gloria to David's face, and then beat him to a pulp with his pay-to-win bully upgrades. As an audience, we can now feel these compounding issues which got us to relate to David in the first half of the episode, snowballing in its second. And it's a snowball that comes to a sudden crash when David returns to the hospital, only to find out the doctors have given up on saving his mum because they didn't think she'd be able to afford the surgery. Now, so far I've only really talked about how the writing of this episode sets David up as a compelling protagonist, but so much of how Edgerunners sells the emotion of each moment is in its visuals, sound design and music, and the scenes of David dealing with Gloria's death are an astonishing example of that. The doctors leave David to handle Gloria's cremation, a process as unceremonial as it is impersonal. It's during this sequence that we get our first listen to the show's ending theme, Let You Down by Dawid Podsiadło. This hauntingly beautiful, melancholic lament written just for the show. We only see Dawid from behind as Gloria's ashes are dumped out of this grimy vending machine, and we can hear him weeping for his mum, but the show never actually lets us see him cry, putting a distance between us and Dawid where not even the audience can be there for him in this moment of need. He carries Gloria's remains home on the same route he took to school, but in contrast to the previous sequence that was used to show the lively depravity of Night City, now the streets are empty, emphasising how isolated and alone Dawid is with his mum gone. And what's more, alongside the song, we also hear Dawid being bombarded with messages reminding him of how his life is falling apart. The school wanting to transfer him out, the utility company shutting down their water and electricity, the landlord threatening to throw them out on the street, Dawid's black market guy trying to lowball him for the stolen tech. It paints an intense and desperate picture of a boy utterly powerless under the machinery of the city. And it's a picture painted so vividly by the visuals and sounds as much as it is by the writing.
Oh yeah? Well fuck you too, bitch!
Unable to find just 5 minutes to process his mum's death without somebody demanding something from him, Dawid is at his breaking point, and that's when he receives Katsuo's call, mocking him for Gloria dying and blaming her for trying to live beyond their station.
God only knows what she had to endure to send her delinquent son to an academy he doesn't belong at.
Unlike the others, Katsuo isn't owed anything. The only thing he wants is to rub Dawid's face in it, and it sends Dawid over the edge. He grabs the military-grade implant his mum stole and heads for Ripperdog, his black market contact, and demands to have it installed.
I want this fused here. High time I chrome the fuck up.
Now, if you'll indulge me for just a moment, I want to spoil a little bit of Tekken Bloodlines, which is fine because I know you don't care about Tekken Bloodlines. This might seem a little bit out of left field, but Tekken was the show I watched immediately after Edgerunners, so it's mostly that Cyberpunk was still fresh on my mind, but there are plenty of parallels. Both are 2022 animes, both were released on Netflix, both are adaptations of video games, and both star a young male protagonist whose story is incited by the death of his single mother. The only difference being, oh my god, Tekken sucks at this. I had no affection for Cyberpunk until seeing Edgerunners, but Tekken, especially Tekken 3, which Bloodlines is based on, was a significant part of my childhood. There's a decent chunk of my young life where Jin Kazama and his, on reflection, admittedly lame fire pants were the coolest shit imaginable. In fact, I have a distinct memory of drawing a picture for history class of Henry VIII crying after the death of Jane Seymour, and for whatever reason, 8-year-old me thought the most appropriate person to console the king on the death of his wife was shirtless Jin Kazama, which is hopefully something I can memory hold for the next 2 decades. But my point is, despite my affection for the character, Tekken Bloodlines makes Jin such a bland, unengaging lead, even though it takes a very similar setup to Edgerunners, and that's something that really stood out to me. The reasons between success and failure in these cases is to do with how the stories set up their themes, and the rationale behind characters making decisions within their setting. If the story's themes and the main character's circumstances are relatable, and the story explores those themes in an internally consistent manner, then the audience is more likely to have an emotional connection to what's going on and be able to grasp what's at stake. So when Dawid gets bullied, it's not just about how bullying is bad, but we understand why he's getting bullied, what the socioeconomic factors are behind their decisions to pick on him, how little he can do about it, how it furthers his isolation, how retaliating won't really work out for him, etc, etc. When Jin gets bullied, it's because he's different in some sort of intangible, special main character way, which doesn't really mean anything from the bully's perspective, and it's mostly just a low-stakes excuse to show what a badass Jin is. And I'm not saying there aren't themes in Tekken Bloodlines. The bully scene does lead into the values Jin's mum Jun is trying to instill in him, like how he needs to control his anger and show restraint because of his unique fighting prowess from his unique fighting heritage, which makes him destined to be a great person who will one day travel the world. And these are factors which do follow Jin throughout the rest of the series, but compared to Dawid's issues, they're just a lot less relevant to me, and I imagine most people's experiences who aren't descended from ancient martial arts families with blood tainted by Satan, which is a genuine plot point throughout the Tekken series. And then there's following up on these themes in an internally consistent manner. Gloria's death intensifies the themes established in David's story, the violence and the apathy of Night City, the inequality felt hardest by those at the bottom, and David's isolation and directionlessness. Gloria's death and how it affects David is something which makes sense in the world that the story is set up. On the other hand, Jun gets ganked by Steroid Shrek in a scene that has absolutely no setup or precedence.
What are you doing in my swamp?
Like, as a fan of Tekken, I know who Ogre is and why he's doing what he's doing, but within Tekken Bloodlines, this scene feels completely disconnected from the story the episode was telling. It happens because this is what the story needs to happen to get Jin to the next scene, but unlike Edgerunners, the connective tissue between this event and the characters, settings and themes really isn't there. In good stories, this connective tissue can be built up by having arcs within arcs within arcs, and in just its first episode, Cyberpunk Edgerunners has taken its main character on a complete character arc. I really wanted to get across those points about how the story quickly outlined David's problems around money, the school, and his mum's expectations, because those are key points in understanding David in this first arc. Across the episode, we get to see how those issues make David's situation increasingly desperate, before, during, and after Gloria's injuries, letting us know what's going on in his head at each stage. It gives us a clear understanding of how David went from an apathetic but well-adjusted school kid to a broke, rage-fueled squatter who wants to replace his spinal column with a stolen thermonuclear warhead. And that continuation of playing out these mini arcs is something that is picked up straight away in episode 2. Despite Doc's warnings about the effects installing the military-grade spinal tech, known as a Sandevistan, will have on his mind, David goes ahead with the implant anyway, and calls in at the academy for his first order of business. Namely, beating the ever-loving shit out of Katsuo.
Check it out. Get a load of this guy. Is he serious?
Unlike the reverse pummeling that Katsuo gave to him, David doesn't care about keeping things out of sight, delivering the beatdown in full view of the school security and ensuring his immediate expulsion. And for a moment, David is pretty happy, until the adrenaline wears off, and he realises that getting revenge on Katsuo doesn't actually help him in any way. Here, this episode is concluding the arc from the first episode to set up a new one. David was driven to lash out for vengeance in episode 1, but now that he's got it, he has to face the reality that he doesn't really have much else to live for right now. And again, the show conveys that with a repeat scene of David walking the streets of Night City, except this time instead of showing off the depravity or David's isolation, we get shots of David lost amongst the background, indistinguishable from other background characters and just becoming another lost soul out of the spotlight, the last place your main character should be. It's at this lowest point that Lucy comes into David's life. Picksocketing money chips from the corpos on the train, she moves invisibly to everyone apart from David, who, thanks to his Sandevistan, is able to react faster than her, grabbing her by the wrist. Lucy pulls him to the side and immediately establishes her dominance by getting handsy and flirtatious with him. I tend to go for, a good old-fashioned T-pose, but to each their own. But Lucy's hands-on approach does provide a much-needed distraction for David. In a split second, the kid goes from staring out the window, contemplating all the problems piling up around him, to suddenly being with this cool, exciting older girl who's taking an immediate interest in him. You could say he's gone from rock bottom to rock hard. Sometimes I'm actually disappointed in myself for these jokes. But on a more practical basis, Lucy, impressed by David's lightning quick reactions, offers to take him on as her picksocketing apprentice and split the loot.
We'll split the haul. 80-20.
What? Fuck that. We go halvesies on the work and then I get ennies?
I'm the one who'll be pushing the klep shards. Plus, got a trainee to supervise now.
Providing a potential solution to his rent worries, and again, tying the economic themes of the show into every character decision. The manic pixie dream girl who forcefully yeets the despondent male character out of his rut, causing him to instantly develop a crush on her, isn't anything new, least not for Studio Trigger and Hiroyuki Ameishi, but damn if it is not an effectively used trope in this case, especially in the scene that follows. David's overuse of the Sandevistan lands him in the back of a shady ambulance that Lucy busts the pair out by riding David's hospital gurney the wrong way down a busy road, and despite the absolute insanity of everything going on around him, David is singularly transfixed on Lucy. And again, for me at least, the reason that this relationship works so instantly is because of how well the show has communicated David's state of mind. Because the first episode introduced him and his situation so well, we can understand why he'd start to fall for someone like Lucy so quickly, even at this early stage where there isn't much of a foundation to their relationship. On top of that, it all comes back to that arcs within arcs within arcs thing. At the start of this episode, David was on a high after beating up Katsuo, but came crashing down when he had to face the reality that he had nothing else keeping him going. Lucy bursts into his life and not only offers a way to keep a roof over his head, but more importantly, she's someone who's noticed David at a time he felt completely alone. At this point, she might not be much more than a welcome distraction, but that is enough to give David hope, even just for the moment. And the fact that David's primary interest in Lucy at this stage is mainly physical is not lost on the show. This is Night City after all. We've already seen how shameless people here become when in search of a quick dopamine hit. So when Lucy brings David back to her room, there's plenty of subtext, even if things don't get quite as heavy-handed as we might have expected. In fact, it's quite the opposite. What we really get here is a first glimpse at Lucy's vulnerability. She's quick to tease David, seeing straight through his attempts to impress her by acting overly confident. But when he shoots back, making fun of her moon vacation poster, Lucy gets defensive.
Right back at ya. Like that. Kinda gonk poster.
Got a problem?
And what follows is perhaps Edgerunners' most iconic and memorable scene, the moon date. When Lucy slips on that brain dance, for the first time we see David truly carefree. Just a kid, just for a moment, despite everything he's already been through, dazzled by the simple sensation of his own weightlessness and the warmth of the sun. It's such a pure kind of joy that Lucy has given him, especially from where he was emotionally when they met. We see Lucy herself leading him on, just happy that she's found someone she's comfortable to share her dream with, dropping that cold facade and being genuinely excited to show David the things she cares about. What this scene gives us is a glimpse at the genuine, innocent happiness David and Lucy are capable of. And it is a powerful sentiment, underlined by how far these characters have come in just one episode, and the use of the song I Really Want to Stay at Your House by Rosa Walton blaring throughout the scene. And this scene leaves such a strong impression because it is a perfect contrast to everything else we have seen so far. No matter how dark and desperate things get throughout the rest of the episodes, we cling to this moment, coming back to it throughout the series because we know that outside of the claustrophobia and the chaos of Night City, this dream is the happiness David and Lucy could have, if only they could escape. But no dream lasts forever. And so it is for this episode, and so it is for this video.
Tough deal, but that implant you chipped is all mine. I've been taking it back now.
What's crazy to me about these first two episodes of Edgerunners is that for what they're doing in introducing the themes and the setting and the main duo, they're pretty flawless, and yet in the grand scheme of the show, they are far, far from the best episodes. That's how high the bar on Edgerunners is. Like, we haven't even seen most of the main crew by this point, or even introduced the antagonists, or, you know, what the plot of the show is, but even this early on, I was completely on board with whatever CDPR and Trigger were throwing my way. Seriously, if you've made it this far and you haven't watched Edgerunners yet, please go and do so, because I cannot recommend it highly enough. But as much as I enjoy gushing over Edgerunners because I think it's a genuinely fantastic series, what are some of the main lessons we can take away in how to introduce a protagonist, particularly in a sci-fi fantasy setting? Well, I think one of the main things to learn here is just to keep them human. Like, not literally if you're writing about like an alien or a robot or something, but it shouldn't matter how outlandish your setting or story is, unless you're purposefully doing something weird. It's probably a good idea to make the issues plaguing your character relatable. And in how Edgerunners stacked those up, with the money problems, school bullies, and glorious expectations, it gave the audience more of a chance to relate to one of those issues. And by showing how these problems impact each other, it causes someone who might only relate to one to understand the implications of the others. On top of that, Edgerunners reinforces those emotional connections by putting its characters through mini arcs within larger arcs, creating memorable highs and lows that an audience can quickly identify. It's also important to reflect those problems in your story's setting and themes. Financial inequality and consumerism pervade every level of Night City, from the constant advertising and coin-op washing machines to rich bullies buying better beatdown tech and loved ones being denied medical attention. Even David's decision to work with Lucy is partially informed by the promise of being able to make his rent. Lucy's importance to David is definitely emotional, but the story still checks in to reiterate its themes. And finally, something that I think Edgerunners does particularly well is demonstrating that its characters are capable of genuine happiness. Even for a show as grim and gritty as this one, we still need to believe that our characters can achieve happiness. Or else, what's the point of getting invested in them? Why would anyone care about a protagonist achieving their goals if they're just going to be just as miserable anyway? Like, of course there's exceptions to this. If you're writing a story about a character who's never happy even when they get everything they want, then that's different. But generally, even when the chips are down, we should still believe that our heroes are capable of happiness, whether they actually achieve it or not. In Edgerunners, we only get a brief glimpse of what that happiness might look like for David and Lucy, but it is such a powerful, resonant moment that it's all we really need to sustain us throughout the horrors inflicted on them throughout the rest of the series. And if all else fails, just spend millions upon millions of your own hard-earned money to get Studio Trigger to animate your story for you, because even with a half-baked, busted dumpster fire of a story, they can still make it look pretty cool. But anyway, thanks for watching. That's enough from me. Now if you don't mind, I have a couple of things to attend to.
Why?